We've invited students, and there's students, this is their X block, and we have a few students here already, so thank you for being here. And we have, I think, some on the way, but I want to go ahead and get started so they may be joining us as they make their way up here. You may have noticed on the website that we have changed a little bit on the community portion, where on the drop-down menu, come in, you guys. Yeah, Verity, could you let them in? I think people may feel like they can't come in now. So we on the drop-down menu on the community section, we used to have under VSSA Parent Ed, and we are expanding our opportunities for speakers to come to campus for whatever reason. It may be parenting issues, it may be growing and broadening our understanding of social emotional learning, it may be pedagogy. There may be various reasons why we bring different speakers in. So we moved it now to speakers for parents. So it doesn't matter maybe who the sponsoring agency is. We just want to be able to bring great speakers to enlighten all of us on various issues. And that was kind of the impetus of what is behind today. So last June, my husband and I were in Bergen, Norway, and we were in a little souvenir shop, and I was buying a flag, and I didn't know, I don't own a boat, but I picked up a pennant for a boat, and Dr. Hunt looked at me and said, "Oh, you must have a boat." And I said, "No, I didn't realize that's what this was," but that struck up a conversation. And so, again, it's such a small world. He mentioned that he was an educator. Bob and I said, "We're educators. Where are you?" "In Calabasas." "Where are you?" "At Stanford." "Oh, we'll have a lot of former students that are at Stanford." He was familiar with some of my former students who have been at Stanford studying history. And one thing led to another, and he said that he'd been working in the area at National Geographic, and what an exciting process he had been experiencing with developing this book. And my wheels started turning and thought, what a great opportunity to bring him to Viewpoint to speak to you, parents and students, faculty, to broaden our horizon on an interesting topic. So, and then another funny coincidence, when I came back to talk to Mark McKee about bringing Dr. Hunt on campus, Mark said, "Oh, Patrick, I've heard him speak a ton of times. He's great." So here, another coincidence. Mark had heard Dr. Hunt speak in the Bay Area when he was up at his former school. So we are really fortunate to have Dr. Hunt here today and to enlighten us about his experiences. As you know, he is a Stanford University professor, and for the last 25 years at Stanford University, starting as a visiting scholar in 1992 and teaching regularly since 1994. The courses he has taught at Stanford accommodate his breadth of interest in the humanities, the arts, ancient history, and ancient technology, as well as archaeological science. He has lived in London, Athens, and Jerusalem, as well as annual time spent in Switzerland, France, Italy, every year since 1994. Among many other countries, he has also conducted archaeological research in Spain and North Africa, Egypt and Tunisia, and in Peru on Inca sites and on Olmec, Maya, and Aztec cultures in Central America. Patrick directed Stanford's Alpine Archaeology Project between 1994 and 2012, continuing as the Hannibal Expedition for the National Geographic Society. This project conducts high-altitude research in alpine passes between Switzerland, Italy, and France. One of his primary research interests has been to track Hannibal's crossing of the Alps in 218 BCE?
Either one.
Annually between 1996 and 2014. Patrick led Stanford teams across at least 25 alpine passes in search of topographic clues matching the texts of Polybius and Livy, who wrote about Hannibal nearly 2 millennia ago. His book on Hannibal was released July 2017. Patrick has been an elected fellow of the Royal Geographic Society since 1989, named in the Biblical Archaeology Society to Who's Who in Biblical Studies and Archaeology. He has served as president of the Archaeological Institute of America's Stanford Society since 1995. Whew. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Patrick Hunt.
It's such a pleasure and honor to be here. And serendipity, a chance meeting in Bergen, Norway. But then minds think alike, and I was looking for a little patch from my backpack that said Bergen. So this was the only place that had both the little ship pennant and the backpack patch. So here I am then today, and I'm really thrilled because, yes, quite a few Stanford students come from Viewpoint, as you know. And some of you may choose to go further east. We're happy to have you at Stanford. And I know that you're taught by the best teachers in the world. So what that means for us is the students who come to us from Viewpoint already know what hard work, what critical thinking, what learning is about. And that also rests upon the shoulders of parents who are here too, setting that high bar. So it always comes together, and I know we may have a very wide spectrum of experience and age here, but I want to tell a little story, if I could, about training. And I'll start with the fact, as I was telling the wonderful librarians today, I kind of grew up in libraries, and books were so important to me that I often had checked out from libraries, at times up to 300 books, literally. In the bed, on the bed, under the bed, wherever, books everywhere. Now, I also had some horrendous fines to pay because of that. And often, those librarians just kind of let it go. They washed it because they said, this kid is reading. So I always loved geography. In fact, the only truly A++ I ever had in high school was in geography. Maybe because we had a stack of National Geographics that went back to about 1890. And if you had told me when I was 11, 12, 13 that I'd one day be an explorer for National Geographic, reading as I did about the Leakeys in Africa, reading about Matthew Sterling in Olmec, Mexico culture, reading about Hiram Bingham at Machu Picchu. I was reading about this stuff and just sucking it in and absorbing it. Little did I have a glimmer of understanding where this could lead. So archaeology, as you know, is eclectic. My PhD is in what's called forensic archaeology, so it's archaeological science. So that's physics, chemistry, geology, botany, a lot of things, biology, that are applied to archaeological problems. Because if you realize in Britain, at the Institute of Archaeology, was the only place where you could get degrees in archaeological science. And that to me was a meshing of everything I loved. So I had a BA in linguistics because language is important in archaeology. So you had to study German and Latin and Greek and Hebrew and Ugaritic and Egyptian and Russian and Italian, all the languages you could, because you never knew where you were going to end up, and I loved everything. I just didn't have one thing I loved, and it was a little bit of an issue because I loved everything. So it took me about 6 years to get through university. I changed majors 10 times. So I loved everything, but it all came together in archaeology. And I was told the only place in the world where I could get a PhD in archaeological science and forensic archaeology was this place called the Institute of Archaeology, University College London. It was the University of London. And it's kind of neat because the new Stanford president has a PhD from UCL too, so that helps. But his is in neurology though. Now, the Institute of Archaeology founded the first school in the world to teach archaeology as a science. 80 scientists under one roof, all working on arcane things, whether it's phytoliths in botanical remains in archaeological sites, whether it's geology, prospecting, trying to match up the quarries to the monuments, the stone that moves sometimes across the world. Whether it was bone analysis, looking, for example, at the rare earth elements in teeth that can give a chemical signature to where you were born. These were fascinating types of problems. That's why science is important in archaeology. So one of the early directors of the Institute was, for archaeologists, a famous name, Sir Max Mallowan. And I would bring books home, and Monica, we've talked a little about that, she knows of whom I speak. I would bring books home with Ex Libris, Sir Max Mallowan on them, with a little tea stain, kind of a second imprint. I'd say, well, I know who put that teacup. It wasn't Max, because that was his important book on Assyrian monuments. So he didn't put it there, but his more famous wife did, Dame Agatha Christie. And you know what she said? Archaeologists study the past. They love old things, right? She said, there's a good side and a bad side to being married to an archaeologist. The good side is, she says, the older I get, the more he loves me. But she said, there's a downside. You don't know what it's like to be married to a man whose career is in ruins. So, there you are. So I was very fortunate to be a student there. And it did lead, of course, to some field science. And in 25 years of field work, tracking Hannibal, I had really kind of like a mini Cray computer with me with all these Stanford students. Smarter than I was, and really neat kids, could ask questions outside the box because they didn't have the archaeology training yet, but they could apply things from here or there. And it's humbling to be with really bright kids like that from Viewpoint School, but it's also a good lesson. And the more we know we don't know. It's just a fact, right? And so in those 25 years, eventually someone asked me to write a book on Hannibal, and Simon & Schuster picked it up, and my editor is the vice president at Simon & Schuster. That really helps. And so he would write to me. He'd say, "You're going back into the field." And Mark, you remember, because I was always going off into the field in between those salon lectures. And so, Mark McKee, right? Back there somewhere?
No, he's here.
Oh, I thought I saw him back there. I'd have to get closer. Anyway, so I'd be on the field, and I'd come back, and I'd go out in the field, and I'd correct observations, come back. So this process of tracking Hannibal took 25 years. And in the process, the book took 10 to write. Well, editors really don't like that, to scratch it. So I remember my editor saying, "Patrick, you're leaving in 2 weeks for the Alps. Would you please send chapter 10 before you go?" Because it was a long, drawn-out process. But that way, we were able to correct and correct and correct and so on. And I will say, when I mentioned the name Hannibal, a lot of people say, "Oh, right, Hannibal the cannibal, Hannibal Lecter, yes?" I say, no, and I'm always a little depressed at first. But recently, so that went on for a while, lowest common denominator, right? But then I discovered something, that there's a connection. When Hannibal's men were starving at the top of the Alps, so hypoxic, hypothermic, they're dying, they've been ambushed 3 times, they've fallen in the rocks, they've been, all their pack animals or their food has been taken, they're freezing cold, their immune systems are whacked out. If they had a little bit of maybe TB or somebody's bringing cholera on board, you can wipe out an army fast, as often happens in the past. So these people are dying like just on the sides of these rocks. And it's really cold. Instant refrigerator. Hannibal had a lieutenant whose name was also Hannibal. It's a common Punic name. And he said, "Commander, we're starving, and there's a lot of fresh meat. What do you think?" Well, Polybius says Hannibal said, "I think not." But do we really know? I mean, you can whitewash, you can change history. We really don't know what Hannibal's survivors did, if they did indeed resort to cannibalism. But then and there I realized, don't dismiss anything, because you never know. There's a kernel of truth in some of the most obscure and ridiculous ideas. Follow it. And to those of you who are just on your way today, boy, suck everything up. Just be sponges and make sure that you follow your heart, follow your dream. Know what you really love. Don't just chase the buck. Follow your dream, because if you decide to be the very best at what you can be, the money will come to you. And I would say that, I'm sure everybody here knows that, but I never let anybody take away my dreams. And I've had a ridiculously fortunate path. But I also never let somebody tell me, you can't do that. So you have to be a little audacious, and there may be a little pain in the process as an archaeologist in the slippery, wet Alps. Okay, this is, Chris, am I okay to do this? So sometimes in the Alps, you break lots of bones. So this arm's been reconstructed 3 times. 2 nice, can you see the tracks? So 2 nice titanium rods. I was told I couldn't break titanium, and I did on another fall. So now I have 2. And I've fallen 40 feet. I've fallen lots of times in places. I can show you a few scars. In public, only a few, okay? So yeah, 40 bones probably I've broken. My back, my arms, my legs, my neck, my back, both feet, both hands. I guess there's, what, 204 bones? I've not broken that many, but quite a few. And it's worth it. It's worth it. Because no pain, no gain. Now, I have not a new broken rib, because this summer on an National expedition, we had a brilliant guy with us who was the musicologist for Seattle Opera, the opera critic. Great guy, wonderful intellect, but we didn't know he was so dehydrated. He finally told us, yeah, I haven't urinated for 24 hours. Bad sign. We had to carry him down the mountain because his legs collapsed. And then I had to carry him down about a mile down the rocks myself. And it was a day that started out snowing and then sleeting and then raining. Finally got to the tree line. I wasn't getting any reception on my cell phone. My SIM card wasn't working. We were too remote. Finally, I could call the emergency services. And the Swiss brought up out of Zermatt a rescue team. 3 hunky guys with big backpacks. And then they disassembled it. And it was a wheelbarrow that they traveled down the mountain, and I jogged behind. The guy spent 3 days in the hospital. He says I saved his life. But of course, on the way in the slippery rocks, I fell carrying him, and I decided he better land on me. So this is part of the process. The Alps are dangerous. A few years ago, we were hiking, and some guy just went by us so fast, and I had 37 Stanford athletes that day. Football players, basketball players, baseball players, crew. These were tough kids. And our system is you don't hike too fast, because when you're climbing 5,000 feet in 3 hours or 4 hours, you take your time. You have to let your blood oxygenate. You have to let those red blood cells, those erythrocytes, pick up more oxygen on the way, or something's going to happen that's bad. So this guy went running by us, and he was maybe about 55 or so. He looked a little bit out of shape. And the Stanford athlete said to our guy, "Why aren't we letting him do that?" And my good friend Joel Blay said, he's not listening to good advice. He's breaking 2 cardinal rules. He's hiking by himself in the rocks, and he's going too fast. We saw him at the end of the day, dead. Yeah, he died because his face was blue. The helicopter came to pick him up. We see a lot of helicopters picking up foolish hikers. So you have to do it right. And I know that I'm probably sensationalized, I'm sorry. But archaeology is, a discipline that is very physical, and it's physically challenging. And I love the idea of being in a place where you're in the field testing out hypotheses on the spot that are physically challenging in the location and intellectually challenging in the discipline. This is where you get to really try out scientific methodologies and discard hypotheses that don't work. It's so fun to be in remote places that are tough places, and yet it's the field lab, not the fixed lab. So I love archaeology for pulling together all these eclectic things. And I'm still on slide number 1. This is not a good sign, because archaeologists, well, we deal better with long ago, not present. So I think you might have some questions, and I'm happy to answer them. I think we'll get to some parts where if you have some questions for me, please do it. But I thought I would show a couple fun slides. Now, okay, this is probably not something I am completely proud of. This is the kind of terrain Hannibal had to climb, although not on a glacier. And he could look down into Italy. If he were at the top of that pass, he could look down into Italy. We think we've got the right pass. That's me at St. Moritz a couple of weeks ago. But this is what I'm not so proud of. Anybody here know Spike TV? Deadliest Warrior? Okay, well, I was the Hannibal expert for that show. And one of the crazy things, we'd heard for years as historians that Hannibal took Asian elephants over the Alps. And yet I'd seen this coin at the British Museum with a security guard peering over my shoulder from the Magot Fort, the silver tetradrachma. Basically, it was minted in Spain from Iberian silver, probably by Hannibal's father Hamilcar. And if you look at that elephant, it doesn't look like an Asian elephant. And I'll get to that in a little bit. But doing this film, doing this documentary, the crew hired Susie, the famous Hollywood elephant. Anybody ever heard of Susie? She's probably now about 30. She is incredibly smart. She knows over 100 commands. She can string words together for commands. And like all elephants, she's voraciously hungry. Elephants have to eat about 200 kilos a day. And we were in a canyon not too far from here because I recognized the topography, filming. She stripped that canyon of almost every leaf. But she was so smart, I'm sure she was smarter than half the crew. Really smart. And they set up these dummies in Roman plastic military, musculata and so on, shields and helmets. And they try to get her to charge these dummies. And Susie wouldn't do it because she'd been trained to respect humans. So some of the crews wrestled one of her big legs up and put it down on one of these rubber skulls that spurts red ink when you crush it. Susie would go, I think that poor elephant needed a psychotherapist. Because this went against all her training. But it totally changed perceptions because she was an African elephant. And African elephants are just as smart as Asian elephants. And they can be just as easily domesticated. Susie proved that. And do you see the coin there? Whoops, no, that's not the coin. That's a weirdo guy. But here, see that coin? Look at the coin on the right. Maybe we could dim a little bit of lights here. I don't know where to begin. But is it okay, or can you see it? All right. You can see it. Do you see the elephant? Now, let me run through a couple slides so you can see that coin better. We don't know who the person is on the recto, with the verso being the elephant. It's either Hannibal's father, Hamilcar. It's probably not Hannibal because he would be too young to be in an adult visage like this. Okay, so you've already seen about that. And we'll talk a little bit about context. What is Rome there is constrained. Rome is citizen farmers. They put down the plow and pick up the sword. So they're basically militias. What do farmers need more than anything else? Land. And Italy's constrained by sea on all sides except one. So the only direction Rome can expand is north into Etruscan territory and Celtic territory. And so the Romans set up 2 new colonies at Piacenza today, but it was Placentia then. Isn't that interesting? Isn't there a town here in the area called Placentia? It's named after that Roman colony. So the Romans encroached upon Celtic land, and they had another one very close by called Cremonum, modern Cremona, the city of Stradivarius today. So the Romans were taking over the Padana, the Po River Valley. The Celts were crying out, and by the way, Celt is the word that Polybius uses because he's writing in Greek, the Keltoi. The Romans are writing in Latin, and they're using the same word in Latin, which is Gaul. So Celt, Gaul, same people. If you think about it linguistically, you'll see how that works out. Both velar sounds at the back of your throat. Try it. G, G. Now take your vocal cord out. And then the L and so on. Same people. And they were crying out for a liberator. And Hannibal works this into his political scheme. Now Hannibal's raised after age 10 in Spain, what was called then Iberia, because his father, after the First Punic War, where the Romans lost 100,000 soldiers and 1,000 ships, the Romans lost the First Punic War except for the last battle. And the Carthaginians were shocked. They weren't used to losing, but Rome dredged up a ship. Outside what you see here in Sicily, you see Drepana in West Sicily there. Drepana, modern Trapani, right here. The Romans pulled up a ship that had gone down, and they want to analyze it to understand Carthaginian naval success. And they knew that Carthage had great boats. When they took it apart, timber by timber, they discovered there was a number on every piece of wood. It had an alphanumeric match. They were mass-produced. And Rome took the template and made a navy. And then lost all this time until the one last battle, the Agadi Islands in 241. Carthage was so shocked and surprised, they threw in the towel. They capitulated. And they shouldn't have. Rome got Sicily and then took Sardinia and Corsica. And now Rome controls the seas. If Rome was a territorial farming agronomic society needing land to expand, Carthage is the opposite. If Rome had citizen farmers, militia, Carthaginians were multicultural from Libya, Getula, of course, Numidia, Carthage, Mauritania, and Celt-Iberians. And they weren't citizen farmers. They were mercenaries. They were paid to fight. So what does Carthage need? The exact opposite of what Rome needs. Carthage needs sea lanes. They're a mercantile trading society. So Carthage needs trade, not land. And the sea was their territory. So low population density in the Lavender, Carthaginian, Punic parts, Rome had an endless supply of people. They just could keep producing a lot of people. And they were defending their homeland. But what did the Romans rename the Western Mediterranean? It tells it all. Some of you who know the Latin here, Mare Nostrum means what?
Our sea.
Our sea, not their sea any longer. You see the point there? They could say, now our sea. It's not Carthage's anymore. So if Hannibal's going to listen to his father, who makes him swear a vow of hating Rome forever and to push back against Rome, to let Carthage alone, that's his goal. He is going to invade Italy. He can't go by sea, and he can't go along the coast. I know some of you have driven along the Corniche. You've driven from Monaco to Genova, 120 tunnels, it's steep. But the Alps Maritime come down plunging into the sea.